But joining us now is the State Auditor of the great state of Mississippi, Shad White. Auditor White, always good to see you, sir.
Yeah, thank you for having me, brother. I appreciate it.
Yeah, man. So you've been, let's just say, exposing lots of stuff,
Yep.
I think, as part of your work. And recently you did a little work on the city of Jackson, our capital city.
Yep.
And revealed some spending that looks like it might not be totally in conformance with regulations, shall we say, statute. But the first thing I'd like for you to do, if it's okay, sir, is explain the auditor's role in the financial affairs at the municipal level.
Yep. It's an interesting little quirk in the law. The state auditor's office is actually not allowed to audit cities in Mississippi. We can audit counties, state agencies, school districts, basically any public entity, but not cities. A little quirk in the law. So the question is, well, who audits the cities then? Well, if the city is of a certain size, and Jackson's our biggest city municipality in the state, they have to hire a private CPA firm to come in and do their audit. So I routinely get the question, hey, when are you going to audit Jackson? For whatever reason, I never get the question, when are you going to audit South Haven or Tupelo? But I always get the question, when are you going to audit Jackson?
Sure.
And the answer is, well, we're not allowed to audit cities. But I can tell you, because Jackson's big and it's had an audit every single year by a private CPA firm. If you want to read Jackson's audits, you can go read it. What I realized over time is that audits are important and necessary, but they're written by auditors, and so they're written in audit language. And so if somebody says that we see an excessive number of accounts receivable in the business enterprise fund -water, to a normal person, that means nothing at all.
Right.
So what we did in this case is we looked back at 20 years worth of Jackson's audits and analyzed them and translated them basically from audit language to normal human language so that your taxpayer, that your voter, could see where the city is financially. And unfortunately, as you said, we saw some disturbing trends and some really basic business model problems for the city.
Yeah, and let me be clear that a lot of what can stick out as concerns may be perfectly legal.
Yes.
And so there's sort of no accountability for just mismanagement.
That's right. That's right.
As long as the numbers are supported and done in accordance with contract law, et cetera, they may be bad decisions, and they may not be the most efficient use of funds, but they're not against the law.
That's right. That's part of living in a world where we elect folks to be the mayors or the city councils or the representatives or whatever it may be. You live with the decisions of that person. They may be doing things legally, but they may not be doing things the best way in the world. So very simple example, and probably the top takeaway from that report was that the city has had an explosion in the amount of unpaid water bills over the course of, well, really 20 years, but especially in the last 5-6 years. And so is that illegal? Is it illegal to not do your job particularly well and not do a good job collecting water bills? Well, I don't know of a statute where you could go arrest somebody for not doing your job particularly well. Is it a massive, massive problem? Absolutely, it's a massive problem.
Yeah.
Water systems are intended to work almost like a business. You're supposed to take in revenue for providing a service, the water, and then you're supposed to use that revenue to keep the system going, to replace pipes, to pay for maintenance, to do all that sort of stuff. If you don't take in the revenue, and you know this from your business background, and you're spending a bunch of money providing the service, in the private sector, we have a word for that. It's called bankruptcy. In the public sector, it's called just another Tuesday, apparently. And that's the whole problem here. That's what I mean when there's a basic, fundamental business model problem at the heart of the Jackson water system.
Yeah, and something else that you're aware of is what we've now learned is the city of Jackson spending a whole bunch of money on sanitization of buildings and the zoo and some other things during the COVID era. And one of the things, you and I have talked about this before, I feel like I've been crusading on this for 25 years or more, but we have these statutes in Mississippi that allow public sector entities to contract for certain services without competitive bidding.
Yep.
They've been on the books for 50 years maybe.
Yep.
And so municipalities and counties seem to, I guess, leverage those provisions more than the state agencies do, in my experience, as a vendor to all of them.
Yep.
So you could literally go out perhaps and contract for whomever the governing body, supervisors, mayor, city council, depending on if it's a county or a municipality, whoever they want.
Yep.
Without competitive bidding, I think we ought to just hire so-and-so over here and this amount. All in favor say aye. I mean, that's pretty much how it works.
Yep.
Without the benefit of competitive bidding, this goes on a lot in the state of Mississippi, but it's perfectly legal.
And folks should understand, too, I think this is overlooked occasionally for, let's say you're a mayor and you're going to avail yourself of that right that you can, use a non-competitive process and just go out and hire a personal service vendor. You need to know that people are still watching those contracts.
Sure.
And so if you hire your cousin, for example, you have broken some ethics laws and you're going to pay a price for that. If you get a kickback, you're going to jail. And that's what we spend a lot of time all day, every day looking for. So there, just because there is that lack of requirement for competitive bidding doesn't mean that nobody's looking. And if folks out there know of cases like that we need to be looking at, that where there might be criminal violations, somebody's taking a kickback, somebody's hired a relative, whatever it may be, come talk to us about that because we want to look at it.
And in the case of the city of Jackson, I think one of the things that came to light is that some of those services were provided and paid for without a contract.
Yep.
There was no contract involved.
Yep.
It was just kind of a handshake sort of deal, which is fine if you want to do that in the private sector.
But illegal in the public sector.
That's right.
That's right. You cannot get paid on no contract, and we've had to explain that to a bunch of folks all the time. And so that gives us an entree to look at some of these cases and to see if there's anything more there once we know that there's been a basic violation of some statute. So, it's never a dull day in the auditor's office digging in all this.
So the point I just wanted to kind of hammer is that there's no audit accountability for just mismanagement or
Correct.
Incompetence.
That's exactly right.
And that's where we're limited.
That's right. And that's one of the reasons why we pushed out this analysis to the public to say, look, you may see nothing in here that's illegal, but this is a problem. This is a governance problem right here.
Yeah.
And nothing, no one-time infusion of cash from the state or the federal government, nothing's going to fix this business model problem until you start collecting water bills.
Unbelievable.
It's really, really simple. Those are the kinds of issues that Jackson is going to have to fix on its own in order to succeed as a city. And really, the success of our state in part hinges on Jackson succeeding. If you look at Alabama's economy is growing in large part because Birmingham and Huntsville are growing. Georgia has done really well in the last 20 years because Atlanta has exploded. East Tennessee is doing well because Nashville, Chattanooga, some of those cities are exploding. Jackson can either be an anchor or it can drive growth in Mississippi. But if we don't get this kind of stuff, and when I say this stuff, I mean the water system and the sewer system and crime, all of these basic governance issues figured out, Jackson cannot achieve its potential.
Totally agree. And speaking of crime, I know you've done some work in that arena as well.
Yep.
And I read your report. I know you spoke recently as well with Center for Public Policy. But I read your report, and it had some rather eye-opening findings with respect to who is incarcerated in Mississippi. Please share that.
That's right. Well, the way we started looking at this in the auditor's office was we'd seen a spike in homicides in Mississippi. Mississippi, unfortunately, ranks number one according to the CDC in the number of per-capita homicides compared to every other state. And, of course, Jackson has been one of the most dangerous cities for the last 2 years running. So I wanted to know what this is costing taxpayers, and bottom line on that is that each new homicide in Mississippi costs taxpayers somewhere between $900,000 and $1.2 million per death. That's coming out of your pocket whether you live in a crime-prone area or not. But more to your point, Gerard, we started looking, too, at, okay, well, who is in our prison system? We keep hearing there's this over-incarceration problem, that we're locking too many people up. Well, one, I can tell you there's a lot of homicides happening in Mississippi. I would rather all those people who are murdering folks be in jail. So that means that actually more people need to be in prison. And two, there's this misconception about the people who are in prison right now in Mississippi. People say, well, all those folks in prison, that's a 17-year-old young man who had a joint in his pocket one time and the police locked him up and he's there for 40 years. That's not what's happening. That's not what's happening. Right now, about 22% of the people in a Mississippi prison are there for a drug crime. And some of those folks are there for selling drugs. The public, according to a Vox poll, believes that 61% of people in prison are there for a drug crime. So the reality does not match up with the narrative that a lot of activists are selling out there.
And I think at one time it may have been close to that, but the trends have crossed.
The world has changed.
A lot
the world has
since
changed.
then. Yep, we got Auditor Shad White. Can you hang around?
Absolutely.
We'll talk some more. Auditor Shad White in the Element Well Studios coming right. We've got Auditor Shad White with us in the studio. So, Auditor, I just shared with you a text I received from one of our local judges that's a friend. You know him as well. And said, how many of the 22% are multiple offenders?
It's a great question, and he's understanding the point I'm making, which is we're typically not locking up a 17-year-old man for getting caught with a joint one time and then throwing away the key. I don't know the exact answer to the question of how many of these 22% of folks who are in prison for drug-related crimes have been there multiple times or arrested multiple times, but what I can tell you is nationally, the average person who is let out of prison has been arrested 10 to 12 times at that moment. So again, you hear folks say, we need to give people second chances. We got to give them a second chance. People mess up one time, we need to give them a good second chance. We give them a second chance in the United States on average. In fact, we give them a third and a fourth and a fifth. What you're asking for is a 13th chance. And yeah, I understand that people can be rehabilitated sometimes, but really what we need to think about when we think about prison policy is, yeah, okay, it's going to cost some money to imprison a person, but what if that person is on the street, and how much more harm are they doing, terrorizing their communities, and what is that costing the taxpayer too? If they murder somebody, if we arrest them for carjacking and then we let them out because we don't think that's a big deal and we don't want to pay for their prison time, and they go out and murder somebody, that's going to cost the taxpayers too. That's the basic point I'm making. And oh, by the way, when they do that, they're probably not going to the neighborhood that you or I live in. They're going to neighborhoods that are historically poor, that are most vulnerable to this kind of crime. And so if you have real compassion for those communities, you ought to be talking about what it's going to take to get the most violent elements of our society off the streets and into prison. That's the big question.
And I believe if you went to the people in those communities, the law-abiding citizens, they tell you the same thing.
Oh, Gallup has proven it. So Gallup did a poll and asked Americans, and they broke this down by race, how much police presence would you like in your community? 81% of black Americans want the same or more police presence in their community. And so if you listen to the ACLU, you would believe it's the exact opposite somehow.
Yeah.
That everybody wants the police gone because they're a dangerous element. No. Of course we see TV headlines and that sort of thing where there's one rotten apple who does something bad as a police officer. But by and large, police officers are out there doing the right thing. They're making the community safer. It's important to say this on National Police Week this week. But this is the point, is that we have to get past these activists and their narratives and get down to real hard data about what people want and what makes them safe, and then make policy decisions based on those data.
I haven't reviewed it in a while, but the figure that sticks in my head is there's something like 10 million police interactions in this country a year, and just a tiny sliver of those have any sort of issues related to it.
That's right. Rafael Mangual is a researcher at the Manhattan Institute. His quoted data point on that is 0.03% of arrests involve the use of violent force.
But they hold that up as that, this is just happening on a widespread basis.
That's right.
And the majority of those interactions. And it's just not true. It's just the only ones that get the attention of the media.
That's right. That's right. And the more we focus on those, you hate to say it, but the more we focus on those, the less likely talented young people are going to be to want to be police officers in the first place. So when you talk about needing more police on the street, it's not just a money issue, it's a talent pipeline issue. And so we have to, as a society, stop bad-mouthing police. We need to start talking about the good stuff that police do, and then we have to use that as a way to recruit more people into this very, very important field. Military is the same way. You probably saw these numbers this morning. The military is way, way down on its recruitment. They cannot meet their recruitment goals. And I'm in the National Guard. I see this myself all the time. We have trouble recruiting people. Are you surprised that young people don't want to join the military when the left has spent decades telling them that America is systemically racist, that our country is the root of all the problems around the world, and then you tell that young person at 18 or 25 or whenever, hey, we need you to put on a uniform and risk your life for this institution that we've been demeaning for the last 20 years of your life? What young person is going to do that? Nobody's going to do that. We really have to change the story that we tell ourselves about our country and the stories that we tell ourselves about law enforcement and the military, because they're not rooted in truth if you listen to these leftist activists.
Well, you've got Milley, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, that testified before the Congress in the wake of the George Floyd incident that white rage was the number one problem in the military.
Yeah.
We had the president, I just shared that story, speaking at Howard University commencement exercises this weekend, that said that white supremacy is the number one problem facing the nation.
It's
he
just
put that at the
absurd.
top of the list. You made me think of something that Rhino shared a few weeks ago. You recall, Rhino, that something like of the 8,000 shoplifting incidents in New York, it all came down to like 320 people were
237.
Yeah.
Yep.
So let's just lock up those 237.
That's
Seems
right.
like we could solve
That's
a lot
right.
of problems, but in so many areas of the country, as you know, Auditor, we have sort of decriminalized crime.
Yep.
And we have vilified the victims.
Yep, that's exactly right. To take another spin on that same statistic, a former Attorney General of the United States wrote a piece in the Wall Street Journal several months ago, and his estimate was that about 1% of the population, and they're overwhelmingly males, that 1%, commits all the crime, basically, in the United States, all the violent crime. And so how do you get at that 1%? How do you identify those people and get them off the streets so that the communities that they live in can be safer? And I'll say this, I think we need more police on the streets. I think we need tougher sentences for those folks. We need to stop, catch, and release. But really at the bottom of the problem is the need for data. So we need more crime data so that we can identify that 237 cohort, or that cohort of 1% of people who are perpetrating the violent crime, identify them, watch them, and then arrest those folks once they do something illegal. And then you can incapacitate them. Then you can take them off the streets and the communities can heal themselves.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And we should also point out that we can apply nuance and discernment. You can support law enforcement, but oppose law enforcement abuse and brutality.
Absolutely.
I mean, those can coexist.
Absolutely. In fact, all the best law enforcement officers that I know hold both of those thoughts in their mind at the same time every day, because that is the common sense position. Yeah. By and large, police almost all the time are there to make the community safe and do a great job, even with the constraints placed on them a lot of times by politicians. And you, of course, are going to get that horrible, sad incident that occasionally makes big news. And that is what people think about the police, unfortunately. And it's wrong. We have to change the story around that so that more young folks will go into policing and that we can actually solve this problem. This is totally solvable in the state of Mississippi. I mean, we have a high homicide rate, but the legislature and the governor work together to put more police on the street around the capital zone, and I think that's a great step. That's exactly the kind of stuff we need to be doing. You notice, however, that on the left, none of the leftist activists or politicians can bring themselves to say that more police on the street around the Capitol is a good thing. They can't bring themselves to say it. I haven't heard a single person on the left say that. And the reason is that they're wedded to this narrative that runs counter to the research. They're wedded to this narrative that, oh gosh, if I say something good about the police, that everybody will remember George Floyd or whatever it may be, and I'll have to pay a price for it politically. They're not willing to engage with the real facts to protect their own communities. They're not willing to engage with those facts, and that's just a huge problem that we have.
But don't you believe on the inside they know that is the best situation?
Yeah, absolutely.
They do.
Their constituents are telling them. If you believe the Gallup poll, their constituents are telling, really all constituents are telling all of their elected leaders, I want to be safe at night. And part of being safe means that I should occasionally see a police officer around. Everybody has this position.
Well, this is what's important about you as the auditor, I think, bringing this to the forefront, calling attention to it. You cannot have economic prosperity without law enforcement and without safety and protection of life and assets. You can't do it.
It's proven in studies as well. The number of business starts goes down when the number of gunshots in an area goes up. Tax revenue goes down when homicides go up. This is just common sense, but it's proven by research as well. So if we want Jackson to be an economic hub, we have to find a way for Jackson to get the crime problem under control. I read sometimes people say, well, the real problem is that the state won't dump resources into Jackson and the state won't give big companies incentives to move to Jackson. That ain't the way economic development works. These companies get to choose from anywhere to put their facilities. Right. They're not coming to us and then we say, hey, we're not going to give you any money to go to Jackson, but we'll give you a little bit of money to go to Madison or wherever it is. They're coming to us and they're saying, we are considering coming to Clinton, and Birmingham and Atlanta and Chattanooga.
Exactly
what will
right.
you do for us?
Exactly right.
So people on the left just don't understand economics. They're not willing to engage with the science. They're not willing to engage with the research, despite their claims of being the party of truth and objectivity. So we just have to do a better job of voicing the truth all the time, and eventually it'll start to hit. Eventually people will start to listen.
Totally agree. And here's what we have to commit to do, and regardless of where you go in your political career, now that we have expanded the Capital Complex Improvement District, we've got more law enforcement in there.
Yep.
We've changed the dynamic.
Yep.
We've got to measure the results of that.
Bingo.
Before and after.
Bingo.
So often, Auditor, we pass these laws, and then we just kind of forget about it.
Yep.
We got to measure it.
We'll be able to show the success here, I think.
That's what we got to do.
That's
Appreciate you coming on. Always
Thank you,
good
brother.
to see you, man.
Good to see you.
We're coming right back in the Element Wealth studio. Stay with us.